Ladies and gentlemen, we've got big updates on the Trump-Russia situation with the threats of sanctions, the threats of large tariffs against Russia because of the lack of compliance from Vladimir Putin and the Russians. And maybe some encouraging updates as Trump looks to possibly do tariffs and sanctions in a way that's a little bit more exotic from what we saw with the Biden administration in 2022 in the Western liberal countries. Trump is threatening countries that are buying Russian energy, and he's trying to pigeonhole Russia and force them to come to the negotiating table and make a peace agreement or at least some type of ceasefire. Although we know it seems like for there to be a ceasefire, there's going to have to be some significant agreements on a peace deal. Otherwise, Putin's not interested in a ceasefire because of their current military situation and the amount of land that they are gaining per day. As far as I understand, it's still a slow slog into. I mean, they're still in eastern Ukraine right now. They have about 19 to 20% control of Ukraine, but it's been very slow for them. They've wasted a lot of military assets. They've invested a ton into this war. They do not want peace right now. Although if Trump threatens all these countries and uses the United States as kind of a proxy power grab, we could force a lot of the countries that trade with Russia to stop doing it, at least for a certain amount of time. Specifically India. That's why the tariffs went on India, and they're going to be raised, and they're going to continue to get raised. And this is Trump's strategy: try and force India to stop buying Russian oil, because the Western countries, after the invasion in 2022, said, we're not taking any oil, we're not taking anything, there's going to be no Russian imports into our countries, we're going to try and strangle Russia and destroy their economy and force them to come to the negotiating table. It didn't work because Russia turned to the east, they turned to Russia, they turned to China, they turned to India. Trump is trying to take away one of their big strategic partners from the oil game, especially if these sanctions go into place, to where Russia is forced to rely on China and India a lot more. And so maybe this can actually work. It is different because the Western countries, there's this vibe that, well, the liberals are a lot harder on Russia. What Trump is proposing here would be more of a stranglehold against Russia and potentially force them to come to the negotiating table if they feel pressured enough based off of trade barriers and their economy possibly being hurt significantly by countries refusing to accept their oil. So there's a number of things to look at here. Trump is ready to meet with Vladimir Putin as soon as next week. The strategy is working. Trump is aiming to land a deal, putting pressure on Russia. Trump is saying his envoy has had a productive meeting. That's Witkoff has had a meeting with Putin. Great progress was made. And so we can't get too excited about this because we've heard this about 10 times before. But the reason I'm doing a video on this is because it does seem like there's an extra level, at least another ingredient to this, to where within the past few months, Trump has been a lot more cushy with the Western European NATO powers. He went to the NATO summit. He seemed to have an understanding, and he was apologetic towards what the Ukrainian people had gone through. And it seemed like there was a shift at that point. Originally, Trump went in, he said, I'm treating both countries fairly. We're going to have negotiations. We're going to talk to Putin. We're going to talk to Zelensky. Zelensky agreed to a ceasefire. Putin didn't agree to one. Zelensky constantly meets with Trump. Putin, it's phone calls. Trump will have a phone call with Putin, then Putin will escalate right after that, making Trump look bad. That's why Trump then said, all right, screw this. It's not working, this double-sided negotiation, to where we're talking to both sides, trying to bring them to the table. There were a few different meetings between the Russians and the Ukrainians that went nowhere. And so Trump said, well, now we have to force Russia and put pressure on Russia because evidently there's not enough pressure on them right now. And they feel like they can take more land, gain more control, try and force some type of regime change within Ukraine, force Ukraine to be another Russian puppet state like it was prior to 2014. And so that's the real reason for the shift when it comes to the motivation. And there's a lot of irony at play considering what Trump is attempting to do versus where the Republicans' opinion was of this conflict back in 2022, 2023. Trump might be able to achieve even more pressure onto Russia than the liberals were putting on them back in 2022, 2023. That's why there might be a negotiation. And the key is the Eastern countries, not the Western countries, the Eastern countries, especially if Trump does these sanctions. But Trump doesn't want to do these sanctions, potentially mess up our domestic economy because of an increase in crude oil. If you do sanction them significantly, he wants this to be worth his while. So why would we do the same thing that the liberals did in 2022, 2023 with all the sanctions? It didn't work. Russia continued their invasion and just sold to China and India. Can we get China and India to cooperate? India's more likely. That's why Trump's attacking them with the 25, maybe upwards of 35% tariffs. It's likely going to keep going up and going up to try and pressure India, at least for the time being, to stop buying their oil. And you'd think the price of crude oil would go up and it would spike and it could be an issue. But if this can be alleviated with this meeting, maybe Trump can just threaten Putin and nothing really has to happen. And the Russians will feel pressured by that to the point to where they'd be ready to come to the negotiating deal and have a good faith conversation about some type of peace deal. We don't know exactly where the Russian mind is in terms of their current situation. Are they steadfast on the amount of resources that they've exuded into this war, that they want more land, they want half of Ukraine, they want Ukraine to be a puppet state no matter what? Will they take less than that? Will they take the four oblasts, annex them, annex Crimea, and then call it a day with maybe a DMZ somewhere? I mean, Trump had the 7-point peace plan. It included annexed land for Russia because we're not going to get that land back. Or at least Ukraine's not going to get that land back without NATO soldier help or some crazy stipulation against Russia or crazy threat, which I don't see happening because it would be a major escalation. There was also the talk that a few people were going crazy. I didn't see a ton of it. I didn't really talk about it, but there was a Trump deploying nuclear subs to keep Russia in check. You know, I was reading and people were telling me, well, those subs were already there. And this is just fear mongering by the left, but this was really a nothing burger. I mean, this is just like Trump does this stuff. People go crazy like it's this constant, oh, it's World War III. They say it every time. It's almost like it's a punch drunk thing to where I just get tired of hearing about it. Like World War III, World War III. He's putting these subs. Trump's not going to escalate this situation. I mean, this is an Eastern European conflict. Trump understands that there's a lot of Republicans that want Trump to just back out completely of it and stop funding Ukraine. Technically, we're not really funding Ukraine. I mean, we are and we aren't at the same time because any money that we give to Ukraine, we're supposed to be getting back in terms of a rare earth mineral deal. Whether or not that's going to happen or not, we'll see. And then the other weapons that we sent to Ukraine actually were sold to the Western European powers, and then they gave them to Ukraine. So any type of weaponry we give Ukraine, we're either getting our money back or we're getting our money back in the form of minerals. So that's what people really have to understand. But I'm saying this is a different situation. I'm not saying there's going to be any type of peace deal within the next few weeks. It's hard to get too excited because of how long this is dragged on for. But instead of just saying we're not going to be accepting any Russian imports, we're done trading with them, they can just go to the Eastern powers. They can just go to the Eastern countries of the world like India and China. You cut off India from them. You cut off some of the other smaller countries from them. You threaten them with the U.S. economy, with how big we are. Use us as kind of a proxy threat. If you are accepting energy from Russia, the United States will tariff you at a ridiculous rate, or we will do something else that will significantly hurt your country. We will cut off military support, certain things that Trump can do to try and pressure Russia, because then those countries would say, we don't want that. We will stop accepting their energy. We will stop trading with them. We will stop accepting Russian imports. And then Russia in turn becomes isolated and screwed if that ends up happening. Now, sure, that was happening in 2022, 2023, but more so with Western countries. This is something that was projected months ago when it came to us pondering the cooperation the United States could have with India and China from not accepting Russian oil for a certain period of time. Because if that happens, it becomes dire, or at least more dire for the Russians. You don't want to forecast, oh, for sure they'll give in if X, Y, and Z happens, because there might be another plan for Russia to where they might be able to hold on for a longer period of time. It seems a lot of times when you predict these big geopolitical events, there's about 1,000 things at play, and we can only account for 4 or 5. So if there's like all these different components and we only really are privy to 4 or 5 of them, I'm sure Russia's got many different plans on if certain things happen surrounding countries not accepting their oil. But we would think that this is a different ingredient that's introduced to make it more likely that there could be some pressure exuded onto Russia that could force them to come to the negotiating table. Trump meeting with Putin is encouraging. At what level? Probably not a high level, just because we know they've had phone calls and they've talked, but listen, this is something that's a little bit different. And Trump really wants to end this war. He said he was going to end it. It was complications. Russia really didn't want to end it. I guess that's something that Trump didn't. He thought they would be more cooperative. They haven't been. They either want more land, they want there to be a regime change within Ukraine, they want something. Maybe they want all of that combined. Maybe they want half of Ukraine and the other half to be a puppet state. I don't know. But evidently they wanted more. And at this stage, they can kind of get more. If we're just continue doing what we were doing under Trump the first 3 or 4 months of the second term, I mean, it's just Russia against Ukraine. With Ukraine getting very little help, it's going to be hard for Ukraine. It just becomes a waiting match. And we know how Russia, I mean, this is deep in the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union. They longer wars, and they bog you down, and they wait you out. And they obviously have a much bigger military than Ukraine, especially if Ukraine is not getting any help from the NATO countries in terms of ground troops, which obviously they're not. Because then that's just that's heavy escalation in Europe, and that's not what any of the NATO countries want. So Trump was like, well, listen, this is not going to end. The only way this ends is if I turn on Putin. Instead of trying to have this fair relationship, it's clear Russia does not want to play ball. It takes two to tango. Russia doesn't want to. And so there's going to have to be something that nudges Russia to the negotiating table, and that comes down to sending Ukraine weapons. It comes down to pressure. And then liberals say, well, we did exactly this. Well, no, this is a different thing that Trump is doing. Trump is threatening countries that trade with Russia. He's threatening them with major tariffs and other things. So this is an escalation of a threat by Trump, but it's a proxy threat. It's not like, oh, we're going to get really involved with this war and send in our troops. So this is a really, really good thing from Trump. And I think we'll see if this ends up working. It's hard to really have a ton of confidence because it comes down to Russia and what they really feel about this, and whether or not they think that this could be a big problem for them if they can still sell their oil to China, which, why would China help the United States? Doesn't make a ton of sense. India, on the other hand, we've got a better relationship with them to where there might be something that could be negotiated out. So maybe Russia could just say, we're not interested. We're going to continue doing what we've been doing. We're entertaining the talks for these Western countries, but no deal ever gets worked out. That may very well end up being what happens. But any of these threats with like a nuclear submarine or any of that, it's just all, it's just Trump got wind of like a former Russian leader saying something and he didn't like it. And there's not going to be significant escalation from the NATO powers. It would be, if there's any crazy escalation, it would come from Russia, and then NATO would probably respond. That would be my guess. But in terms of this situation, it's a localized thing. It's only in Eastern Europe. It's in Eastern Ukraine, and it's been there for over 3 years. And so we just want to see it ended. The war at this point is bogged down. Yes, Russia is making very small territorial advances. Yes, Russia does have the military advantage, even with Ukraine being supplied with all the weapons. But you would think with all of these Western countries, now with the United States starting to threaten Russian trading partners, that may level the playing field from an economic perspective and force Russia to come to the negotiating table. So this is something we'll have to see how it develops. This is Trump's latest plan. India hasn't even agreed to it. They're just getting hit with all these tariffs, and they're angry about it, and they're saying it's hypocritical for the Western powers to still do business with Russia, and suddenly India is getting threatened with all these tariffs if they keep accepting Russian energy. Because Trump knows if he does sanction Russia, and it does have an impact domestically in terms of crude oil and overall prices in the United States, which I don't know what the sanctions are going to be, but it seems like we're 3 years into this. Are we really going to sacrifice our great energy prices? I mean, the hope is that this is more of a threat, and Putin realizes that, hey, maybe it's time to back down and take the land and run and be done with it, at least for the time being. I mean, you don't know, right? We can come to some type of peace agreement, but if it's 1/5 of Ukraine being annexed, that's not an opportune, that's not the most optimal position to be in at the end of the war, because then you're just inviting another war. But I guess you put in a DMZ and maybe it solves a problem. I think it would solve it for at least 4 or 5 years, at least during Trump's time. I mean, maybe longer. I mean, we'd have to see what the peace negotiations, the peace deal actually is, and how happy the Russians are about it. But obviously there's been a change where Trump now supports NATO more so, mainly because Russia has not been playing ball. That's, people are misreading this. They're like, why is Trump doing this? Because Trump wanted to negotiate fairly. He wanted to mediate between both Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine agreed to a ceasefire. The Russians didn't. Putin's been non-cooperative. They've had phone calls. Putin said something to Trump, and then he's done other things on the battlefield. So Trump's angry about it. That's the bottom line. They have not cooperated, so Trump is mad, and Trump is saying, all right, you guys are the ones that we have to pressure because you don't want peace right now. Russia does not want peace right now. They want either more land or more leverage in negotiations or whatever it ends up, whatever it is, they want more. And so Trump knows that's the main ingredient that has to change. We have to force them into accepting something, and the way you do that is by pressuring them. And so hopefully this ends up working out. I mean, we'll have to see. Again, it's one of those things to where I know people they're tired of hearing about Russia-Ukraine, and it's been ongoing for over 3 years, and Trump said it would be over on day one, and he was exaggerating. It was hyperbole. But listen, we thought it was going to be ended pretty quickly, and it can still be ended within the first 8 or 9 months of his administration, which would be great. But it is going to require significant pressure. My hope is that maybe it's just threats and then there's some type of negotiation, because we don't want there to be crazy sanctions on Russia because of the potential domestic economic impact that we would feel. And we're not ready to deal with that, especially with a war that's over 3 years old, that where basically the front line is the same as it was 2.5, 3 years ago. I'm exaggerating, but it is in a similar spot. So we're not interested in that. We can pressure countries, and we can tell countries, and we can implement a plan that maybe only lasts a few days to force Russia's hand. But we don't want another large-scale sanction situation that's going to significantly affect the price of oil. At least I don't want that. And I don't think Trump doesn't want that either. But there has to be some form of pressure to try and get Russia to come to the negotiating table. So guys, either way, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you like the video down below. Also follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.